Welcome. If this is, I imagine this is the first time for some of you, and so I'm going to give you a warm Braver Angels welcome with jazz hands. I'll introduce these to you in a few minutes, but yes, I can see my team already starting to show them. Very good. So Braver Angels is we are a national nonprofit devoted to healing the partisan divide through civil discourse. And as you can see, we are a grassroots enterprise. We have people from all over the country, and we're almost entirely volunteer run, so we're glad you're here. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about Braver Angels debate. Many people, when they think of the word debate, think of maybe a presidential debate, which is more about talking points, or the competitive kind of debate that you do in high school, where both sides try to pummel each other into the ground and like score the points and win the day. And this kind of debate is different primarily in its spirit. We consider Braver Angels debates to be a collective search for truth. And so what that means is there are no teams and there are no points. What we invite you to do is come here and share your passion, share what you really think. Everyone in the room is invited to speak and ask questions. But there will not be teams or points. And the thought is that if we all come and share what we actually think, including the things we're not sure about, our doubts, and the places where we think the other side has a really good point, we can get somewhere. And so I'm very happy to see all of you here. And I would like to take a second and introduce our partner for tonight, and then we will go through some details and get the show on the road. So we are delighted tonight to have Clea Connor here from Intelligence Squared. Intelligence Squared is our partner for this debate, and we actually have done a series, a small series. They did a media bias debate about exactly 1 week ago, and we would strongly encourage you to check that out as well. We'll put the link to their website in the chat in a moment. But Clea, welcome. Will you tell us a little bit about Intelligence Squared?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and good evening, everyone. It's really inspiring to see that at 8 p.m. on Thursday night, we're all gathered here to debate something that's really important. So that's refreshing and different and very neat to see. Also happy to be partnering with Braver Angels on this series, which, we were talking about doing a debate on media bias. We ended up doing a debate last week on whether or not the New York Times specifically had lost its way. And I know a lot of you here attended that event. And thanks so much for coming out and checking it out and seeing what we're doing. We really are aligned in our missions. For us, it's really about restoring civility to American public discourse and bringing smart, intelligent conversations back to the public square. So it's really neat to partner at the grassroots level and see this happening, all over the country with all of us here tonight. So I really look forward to hearing your arguments and seeing how last week's debate will inform this week's debate, and look forward to seeing the Braver Angels community come together here.
Absolutely. Well, we are so happy to have you with us. And as I keep telling you, you are also invited to ask questions and give speeches should you want to. We'll let you be the judge of that. But when we say everybody is invited to speak, we do mean it. And I say that partly to underscore that for all you shy people out there, I'm also talking to you. I think that often shy folks have more to say than those of us who talk all the time, because you're observing always. So I believe in you. Take a chance, raise your hand. So I'm just going to run through the basic structure and rules really quickly to orient everybody. So tonight we will be debating the resolution, Resolved, American Media Undermines Free Speech and Fair Elections. Our style of debate has affirmative and negative. And so affirmative means that you agree with the resolution. You think, yeah, it does undermine free speech and fair elections. And if you're in the negative, it means you disagree. And if you're not sure exactly where you fit, that's cool too. Just raise your hand for whichever side seems to make more sense to you. And we welcome speeches from every direction on this topic. One other thing I'll say just particularly about this topic is the media is a big thing. And so if you would do us a favor and just share what you mean when you say the media in your speeches, we will all be grateful. So we have affirmative and negative, and it'll go speech, questions, affirmative speech questions, negative speech questions, affirmative speech questions, negative speech questions. And in order to give a speech, you can raise your Zoom hand cold, but I'd actually recommend that you reach out to one of our whips. And whips, if you would, dance in your frame for a second so that we all can see you. Lovely. Yes, we have Leslie, Jack, Chandler, and Bruce. And if you open your participants window or just look at their name, you'll see that they have letters beside their name. And so if your first name starts with A through D, your whip for tonight is Leslie. If it's E through K, you're with Jack. L through R, you're with Bruce. And S through Z is Chandler. And you can chat to any of them, but just to spread it out a little bit, we like to assign people a particular whip. And you can chat them with any questions you have. And if you'd like to speak, they're a great person to reach out to, because they'll be sort of helping me know who wants to speak and who's in the queue, and who's coming up next. So I recommend that. And then the other thing I want to remind you of is how to use your Zoom, raise your Zoom hand, in case you don't know. So speak more slowly. I get this advice all the time. Thank you. I will speak more slowly. Just get all this adrenaline and then just speed through things. Okay, so to raise your Zoom hand, what you do is you will go to the bottom of your screen next to sort of the mute button and things like that. And there will be a button that says participants. And if you click on that, at the bottom of it, there will be a raise hand function. If you click on that, yes. So I see that Ron has found it. Vanessa, very good. Go ahead and try it out. I see folks picking it up. Yep, good. So that is the way that you will raise your hand to give a speech or ask a question. And I keep tabs on that. Yeah, folks are getting it. Great. Okay. So Leslie, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and lower all the hands for now. But I am glad that you all have tried it out and know where to go. Couple other small things. If you would keep your chat window open, that's how the whips can reach out to you. And so if you're somebody like me who's always like, ah, or like, yeah, like making big facial expressions, they may be like, you seem like you have opinions. Do you want to give a speech? So they'll do that via the chat, and that's where you should look. If you have tech questions, our whips are brilliant, but they're not, we try to funnel the tech questions to one email address, which is eventhelp@braverangels.org. So if you reach out, our best technical minds are on the other side of that inbox and can help you. And two final things. The first is, when you do ask questions, we use a very simplified version, modified version of parliamentary procedure. And so there's really only one main rule you need to know, and that is, it's called addressing the chair. And so any question or anytime you're talking in any way, for the rest of the night, you will talk as though you're talking to me. So you may think my name is April. My name is actually Madam Chair until the rest of the evening, till we wake up tomorrow morning. And so what it will sound like if you do ask a question is something like, Madam Chair, the prior speaker said X. My question is Y. And so we're gonna do a little demo of this. David Iwinski, I'd like to ask you to give the last two sentences of the resolution why dogs are better than cats. And then Esther, I'm going to ask you to ask him a question. Go ahead.
Intelligence, love, apathy, and warmth. These are things dogs can deliver and cats can only play at. I rest my case.
All right, very good. Now I'm looking for questions for the speaker. We'll go to Ms. Cash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker, what are his thoughts on cats who like to cuddle?
That's an excellent question. You can go ahead and answer, Mr. Iwinski.
Never met one.
Personal experience is also something we emphasize. I recommend, yes. Yeah, totally. Me either, David. So you'll notice that was in the third person. When you ask a question, that's what it should sound like. I will enforce that rule a little bit strictly because it's the thing that helps us show all the passion, but also turn down the heat a little bit and keep it less personal. The final thing you need to know is about jazz hands. These are jazz hands. People who have seen them before, let me see your jazz hands. Yes, very good. Yeah, love it. So we use jazz hands to show approval. And so that can be at any time during a speech, during a question, if something's funny, if you like are like, I love the Steelers. And I was like, yes. Anytime you want to, yeah, there we go. There we go, David. Show us some jazz hands. It's a great way to help this feel like a communal experience, even though we're all of course, on a computer screen. So with that, I'm going to call this debate to order. On Resolved, American media undermines free speech and fair elections. For our first affirmative, I'd like to call on David Iwinski. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I speak in the affirmative that Resolved American media is a threat to free speech and free elections. For media, I primarily mean large media, Main Street media that reaches most people, but social media as well. I'd like to start off with a little story about Diane Sawyer, very prominent journalist, considered one of the best of the last 50 years. In 2007 on the Today Show, she told a little tale and she said, you know, I wanted to be on a jury once and I was taken off the jury. The judge said to me, you know, are you sure you can tell the truth and be fair? And I said, that's what journalists do. Every person in the courtroom laughed. And then she said, it's the most hurtful thing I've ever had happen to me. Well, look, there were 3 real truths that happened in that moment. Number one, journalism had already by then strayed far from being truthful and being fair. Number 2, everybody in the room knew it, except the journalist, who maintained a naive fiction that she was not fair and honest. And everybody else in the room knew the opposite. Interestingly enough, a week ago, on a debate hosted by Intelligence Squared, which was brilliant, I learned that during the 6 months prior to the 2020 election, the New York Times, as a matter of policy, refused to have a single pro-Trump editorial. This is the newspaper of record. It's the one that everybody's supposed to look to. They decided. Now, despite overwhelmingly negative press, Trump got 74 million votes. Those people's voices were silenced, consciously silenced by the New York Times. And how did this happen? The good old days, you got to go all the way back to the 50s and 60s and Walter Cronkite. When Walter Cronkite said, that's the way it is, he meant it. Facts, figures, data, info. Who knew how Walter Cronkite voted? I wouldn't be able to tell you. But something happened in the 60s and 70s. One was Vietnam, when the media suddenly played a part in their portrayal of that war and the horrors of that war, coupled with a lot of unrest in America. But then there was a bigger event. Early 70s, Woodward and Bernstein published Watergate reporting, took down a president. And this really changed things massively, because all of a sudden it wasn't about reporting the news, it was about making the news. It wasn't about getting the facts and letting the public decide. It was about bringing down a president and making history. And goodness, didn't journalism get sexy? And all of a sudden, journalism schools expanded and everybody wanted to be there. Now it's universal. The Center for Public Integrity earlier this year published a statistic that they reckon 97% of journalists' political donations go to liberal Democrats. Washington Post surveyed 13,000 journalists and concluded 8 out of 10 were liberal Democrats. The Media Research Center viewed 1,700 hours of CBS, ABC, NBC video from June 1 to September 30th of last year during the election. They found it was the most hostile negative coverage of a president in all of history, 92% negative. Well, what's the big issue? Well, it's plain. Americans make great decisions when they have the facts. We can determine what's good for our country, our people, our future, our children, our lives. But 330 million Americans can't be on hand for every political speech, every action. They can't sit in Congress. They can't watch C-SPAN all day. They depend upon the media to be honest and factual and balanced. And they don't get that today. And some people will say, well, dang it, Americans should find it on their own. They should go to the internet. But I got news for you. For a lot of people that work 8 hours a day and come home and get dinner, they don't have 5 hours to pore over the internet and figure it all out. They depend and rely upon the media. So in closing, I think that the media has, from its time when it was facts and figures and trusted by everyone, we have eroded to a point where it's trusted by very, very few. And yes, there are those who will sing their praises, but often they're on the same political side. They like the fact that it's not fair and not balanced because it gives them their political views. I stand firmly believing that the American media, as constituted today, is a threat to free speech and free elections. Thank you.
All right, jazz hands for our brave first speaker. Very nice, yes. Okay, are there questions for Mr. Iwinski? Again, raise your Zoom hand and we will start with Kieran O'Connor. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to the speaker, whose speech I immensely appreciated, would be, how would he recommend journalists cover a president when he's clearly lying?
All right, 1 minute, go ahead.
Well, the real question there is what's clear and what isn't. When the president's clearly lying, the president should be called out. But the president should be called out equally in both parties. One president of one party shouldn't be constantly attacked while the other equally states mistruths, half-truths, but gets a pass and gets questions about what kind of ice cream you lick in there, sir. I think that it's got to be fair on both sides.
All right, further questions? We'll go to Ethan Abelman. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the speaker would support going back to something like the fairness doctrine, or if they have another solution in mind for how to address this problem.
All right.
Thank you very much for that question. And it's a thoughtful one because it's a very difficult thing to overcome given the college-based indoctrination of a lot of journalists. I think the fairness doctrine or balanced time is not an unreasonable solution, although I'm generally not a favor of government mandates. But in the absence of media correcting itself and acknowledging this problem, it may be the only way to get this started. But it's a great question and a very, very pernicious problem.
All right, we'll take for a final question, Ms. Chisholm, Rita Chisholm. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please ask the speaker if he has any recommendations for practical action on the part of the public to help hold, mass media responsible for what they do report?
All right.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that we have to be the fact checkers of the media from our own experience. There's a lot of agencies and organizations that have sprung up as fact checkers, but if you look deeper, you often find they have a political bent. I'll give you one personal example. I attended 3 Trump rallies last year. They were honestly positive, enthusiastic, all ages, all races, all religions. And I saw the reportage the next day that never once even closely indicated what I saw with my own eyes. So I wrote letters to the editor, I called reporters, and I said, look, if we do bad things, call us out. But you can't call it an unruly mob of white supremacists when the crowd in no way, shape, or form reflected that. We have to become the watchdogs of the media and call them out when they do not report fairly.
All right, and with that, Mr. Iwinski is thanked. One more round of jazz hands. Yes. Starting us off with a bang. Excellent. So for our first negative speech, and those of you who didn't get to ask your questions, by the way, we always have more than we can get to, but keep raising your hand. We'll get there. Note that you can only ask a question of the speaker who's just spoken. All right, for our first speech in the negative, let's go with Monica Guzman. Monica, you have 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So I speak from 16 years in journalism. The easiest way to make a buck in Hollywood, most people don't know this, is by making a horror movie. And the reason is because horror is the cheapest emotion. Fear is the cheapest emotion. When you need attention, you get it most easily with fear. Which brings us to the media, which for me is this collective institution of newsmakers and storytellers. Does the American media undermine free speech and fair elections? Well, one thing that the American media always does is reflect who we are. And who we are right now is afraid. What are we afraid of? Well, a very interesting CBS News poll came out this year saying that the number one threat to Americans, that Americans thought that the number one threat to the American way of life was other Americans, Americans who disagree with them. So what we are afraid of is we're afraid of each other. When we're afraid of other people, we don't want them to talk. And we certainly don't want to listen. So what do? We send signals to the media, this institution that is shrinking, that is struggling to survive. I know, I was in the newsroom at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer the day that the president of Hearst Newspapers came and announced that we were going to go up for sale. And we became the largest metropolitan daily newspaper to close during the recession. We left dozens of people out of a job, and a city went from having 2 newspapers with competing narratives and journalists who wanted to get it right more than the other guy, to a town with 1 newspaper and shrinking local media outlets all around. So we send these signals, and the signals we send, we the people reward our media for telling us what we want to hear, from who we want to hear from. And we punish them for challenging us too much. How? By denying them our attention. So the media that survives this crazy period of time, it must connect with its audience, it must resonate, it must attract, and it will do it with our fear, if that's what it takes, with our fear of each other. And it's fear in the audience's flavor. When I go to the New York Times, sometimes I see their headlines hold the other at this clinical distance. Like the headline, "Meet the 4 kinds of people holding us back from full vaccination." You go into the story and you meet those 4 kinds of people just through statistics and categories. No quotes, no actual anecdotes. Or you go to Fox News and it's like commentary at a brawl. Go to the homepage and see how many times you count the word slams or rips, and how many times those words are aimed at people at the other side. But like the left and the right, the media is not a monolith, it's just people. I'm the media, I'm a person. These are people who are not immune to the same fear of each other, people who are often gripped by it. And yes, most in the mainstream media are liberal. And a lot of the most powerful, influential institutions in our news media are entrenched in the urban lifestyle, staffed by people with college degrees and liberal sensibilities. Meanwhile, the conservative media has risen as this countercultural force, reacting. And together they make a kind of warfare that, again, reflects America and amplifies what we're doing to each other. Do you know that there is not a single, I've been to a lot of these, there is not a single journalism or media conference where folks from the mainstream media and folks from the right-leaning media come together? Not one. But just like us here today, people in the media are not just succumbing to fear, they are also fighting like hell to give us hope and to have a way out of this. To give just extremely recent examples, I just the other day talked to Nathan Bomey of USA Today, who just put out a book called Bridge Builders, about people who dare to bridge the political divide. He's a business reporter. This is a personal passion of his. Or the Institute for Nonprofit News, which just the other day announced a huge initiative among 50 nonprofit newsrooms to prioritize coverage of rural America. And they have leading them the Daily Yonder and Investigate Midwest, which are wonderful publications coming into media with, a different perspective than the mainstream. And also maybe my favorite example, my friend Joy Mayer at the Trusting News Project, who has taken quite a bit of flack from her industry and many liberals, frankly, in her industry for a project called Re-engaging the Right that is daring to ask, wait a minute, who are we missing? Why are we missing these voices and these perspectives?
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in a minute.
Mm-hmm. So I believe that it is actually we who undermine free speech and fair elections. People in the media helped us get into this mess, and people in the media will help us get out. Thank you.
All right. Jazz hands for our first negative. Very good. Love the personal element. Questions for the speaker? I think the first person I saw was your Zoom name is JP. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me. While you're doing that, we'll come back to you in a second. Let's go to Samantha. Samantha, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Chair. My question for the speaker is, in regards to American social media, how does the speaker
Good job.
determine whether or not it's an authentic American voice versus a lot of the foreign interests that are coming in to create what looks to be American media? However, it is not.
That is a great question. Thanks to how technology has exploded expression and allowed all of these different ways to communicate, but without the full embodiment of communication, it means that there's a much greater difficulty in determining accurate statements, authentic voices. And, you know, that has made this entire big mass effort to understand each other that much harder. But journalists have an incredible responsibility to get that right. So there's courses on this, and I can't answer it briefly, but it's certainly very difficult, but it can be done.
All right, JP, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I am ready. Madam Speaker, could you please ask? No, you're Madam Chair. Can you please ask the speaker why I'm a little bit so confused with this? Because logically, fear and the use of fear and the media's use of fear would actually be a better argument for the pro and not the con. Because I can see media scaring people on how to vote and how not to vote, more than fear being an argument the other way.
Go ahead, Ms. Guzman.
Yeah, so I tend to have arguments that kind of toe the line across the affirmative and negative, and you have identified one of those. But really, for me, on this resolution, the fear does not originate with the media. The polarization does not originate with the media. The media, the way it's structured and the incentives it has, is to reflect and resonate with us, the people. So they do amplify. Absolutely, they will end up amplifying. But one thing I'm trying to say is that in part, it's an effort to survive. And the way to get our attention more than the other guy is to scare us.
All right, and for a final question, Mr. Howe, Larry Howe, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, Madam Chair. There was recently an article in the Atlantic that said Germany found a way to reduce polarization. Could it work in the US? And it was basically talking more about public television or public media versus competing for profit media. So my question to the speaker would be, has she seen that article and does she have any thoughts one way or the other on that?
Great.
I haven't seen that particular article, but it is one reason that there's a lot of faith within the journalism industry being put on nonprofit news. It's the market forces that drive a lot of the attention economy. Nonprofits can work outside those forces. They don't need all the clicks, and so they can work for other things. But it doesn't eliminate the problem, because nonprofit newsrooms are foundation supported and grant supported. And then you have to look at, well, who are those foundations and what are those grants? Of course, we have national public radio and PBS stations and things like that. But even there, I know that the concerns still exist about there being a largely liberal professional staff of journalists in this country, in mainstream media.
All right, very good. And with that, our speaker is thanked. Yes, jazz hands from Ms. Guzman, our first journalist to speak tonight. Very good. So just so folks know, we always line up the first few speeches, just regular folks who have agreed to speak first, so that we can get things off with a good start. So we have 2 more of those, and then we will open it up to anybody. And so I would just want to remind you again that your whips are Leslie, Jack, Bruce, and Chandler. And so go ahead and send a chat to them if there's something that you'd like to say. Also, if you have a question that you're burning to ask, it might be a speech. Just think about that. Okay, so for our next speech in the affirmative, we will go to Tab Berg. Tab, go ahead and unmute and ask, and you have 4 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll start this off with, first I have to base this on a bit of a premise, and that is that the electorate is, democracy works best when the electorate is informed. And for a healthy democracy, the media is a big part of that being informed component of it. And the other premise that I would base my position of support for the resolution is that the public absolutely does not trust the media anymore. 56% of Americans agreed with the statement that said journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. So with those 2 components, I think it's very clear that there is a basis of distrust in the media and a sense from the public that they're being misled. I also think there's a little bit of a misnomer in terms of who really is part of this polarization. And the reality, I think, is been found in a study that was done on tribalism in America, that 70% of people are kind of in the middle and they're just tired of it all. And that there's about 15% on either side that are the ones sniping, fighting, and polarizing the whole process. And the problem is that the media's constituency is the 2 people on the other end. And I agree with what Monica had said about fear, but the difference is, I think, is that the media fears to get out of their narrative. There is a certain groupthink that starts to build a certain narrative that they feel they need to follow. And it's very rare for the media. And when the media, I refer to as the legacy media, the large scale newspapers, TV news organizations. I don't count disruptive media like Joe Rogan's Experiment and those I think are a different kind of a situation. But the legacy media really gets kind of trapped in this groupthink that prevents them from giving a fair representation because they're afraid if they do that, they will be literally run out. And there was recently I did a count of reporters who were announcing their retirement because they were being censored or because they felt they were pressured to report a certain way. And 12 different TV reporters in 7 different cities across America has said they resigned for those reasons. So I think it's not a conspiracy of the media, it's more of a mob mentality. And my experience with mobs is that universally they are bad. They feed off the negatives and they rarely feed off the positives. And how do I support some of this stuff? One is a study that I did myself, a Twitter study, and social media is becoming a very necessary component for traditional media. But we took 50 reporters, political reporters, and 50 political operatives. And we took a list of their tweets and took out identifying tweets. And then we shared these with a group of roughly equal Republican, Democrat, and declined to state voters and asked them to identify which were reporters and which were political operatives. And interestingly enough, not a single person could successfully identify all of the political operatives and all of the newspaper reporters, which means if you can't tell the difference between a reporter using Twitter to advance their profession and an operative whose job it is to influence the process, there's definitely a problem there. The other element of this, and I think David touched on this at the very beginning, is if you look at the coverage of a protest, for example, and I took 2 protests here in my area in Sacramento. One was done by conservatives, one was done by liberals. And I went to both of them and watched firsthand. And yet when the reporting was done, it was amazing that you would assume they were complete polar opposites in terms of how they were conducted. But my view of it, when I was there on the ground looking at it was largely a large group of people who were peacefully protesting, expressing their views, and a small group of people who got violent and created chaos. And that was the case on both the conservatives and the liberals. And yet the reporting of it from across the board, TV and print media, was that here were these violent protesters on the right, and here was a peaceful protest on the left. And that kind of selection on how you present what two equal situations, but presented unequally, demonstrates almost an intent to mislead people. Another, I think, example of this was recently a New York Times editor at a forum decried the fact that the media was losing control of the narrative. And that was a particularly troubling statement for me, because I don't think the media's purpose should be to control a narrative. And then finally, I would just I'll just touch on Axios, one of a very premier news reporting organization, actively has said they want their reporters to participate in protests, not just report on them. They want, and that they would bail them out of jail if they did not. And for these reasons, and for the reasons of the need for an informed electorate, I support the resolution.
Wonderful. All right, jazz hands for Mr. Berg. Tab, by the way, is coming to us from the Sacramento Alliance, so we're happy to have you here. Are there questions for the speaker? We're going to start with Gene Wisdom. It's a great name. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker is, aren't both sides of the media guilty of this, the left and the right? And where I come from on that question was an excellent book I read a couple of years ago by Charlie Sykes, who's a conservative talk radio host, who made the point, and the book was titled How the Right Lost Its Mind. He made the point that that fake news really started with the right, started with Breitbart, Hannity, and people like that. Aren't both sides guilty of this?
Right.
And the simple answer would be yes. The difference is, though, there are significantly more what I would consider left media sites than there are right media sites. So just the volume of which side is presenting, and I agree with you 100%. Our media has become very siloed. They are catering, as I think Monica had mentioned, to a few, and because of that, they're each focused on their own information silos. There's just a lot more information silos on the left.
All right, Karen Fink, over to you. Ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the speaker see a way that media, which operates as private businesses, or even, as Monica was saying, nonprofits, when they're operating in this competitive environment and need to get customers, is there any way that we could even expect that these private media industries would be able to move away from the fear-mongering headlines, which to me, it seems it's mainly headlines and the first paragraph, which are sort of misleading of articles on both sides? Like, what incentive do businesses, media businesses have to move away from that model?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think she did kind of mention one of them, although she was less enthusiastic about it than I am. But I think two elements of it. One is disruptive media, raw stuff like the Joe Rogan Experiment, which has a humongous audience. And the other is nonprofit news. And I've definitely watched nonprofit news create a competitive situation that actually brought legacy media a little bit more to the center, a little bit more to more fairness. And an example would be in the city of San Jose, where the smaller newspapers literally all have died. And the San Jose Mercury News was the sole legacy paper left remaining. And then a new nonprofit rose up and has actually become a major player in the media side. So I would say from a consumer standpoint, it would be to support nonprofit and disruptive media.
All right, and for a final question, Stephen Lumsdaine, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I guess I would wonder of the speaker why this issue that we're looking at is an issue of the media rather than the people in power who are expressing these views in the first place. I guess another way to phrase it would be, should we not blame the people who are expressing these extreme views that are then carried by the media rather than the media itself, if that makes any sense.
One, I would say it's not the media's responsibility to do that. The media literally is supposed to report the facts. And I think if they report the facts of what this guy's being extreme and this guy's being extreme, and let the public decide. But I think David kind of hit on an answer to that when he gave a response to a question, in that the goal of the media is to inform by facts and figures, not to make a determination on whether it is an extreme position or not.
All right. And with that, Mr. Burgess, thanks. Jazz hands. Very nice. Yes, good. All righty. So for our final planned speech of the evening, and that means the rest of y'all get ready to reach out to Whips and raise your hands. We will go to Kieran O'Connor. Go ahead. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just let me say what a privilege it is to be here. We are doing the work of democracy. We're doing the work of media. In some ways, we are the media. Braver Angels is the media. I host the Braver Angels podcast. I have a bunch of points that I'd like to make, which I will likely proceed to do in a somewhat discombobulated fashion. But I also wanted to respond to the remarks of the previous speakers, which I found to be very compelling, particularly the speakers who spoke in the affirmative. The first thing I want to say is that I think we can't just consider the media the mainstream media. The media in some ways is more democratic than it ever has been before. If you start a podcast, you start a YouTube channel, and you start putting out content that people like, you can have a national audience. You can be influential. And while mainstream outlets like the New York Times, which I agree have become more biased, may have more weight when it comes to elites and other journalists and policymakers, people like Joe Rogan, people like Jordan Peterson, they have arguably as much influence with the greater population. And so I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we all have a voice. And in some ways, it's our responsibility to step up when we want to make our voice heard and to seek out all of the media that's out there. Secondly, I wanted to respond to Mr. Iwinski's points about the New York Times, many of which I agree with. And I think had I participated in the Intelligence Squared debate, it's possible I might just have agreed that they've indeed lost their way. I find much of the Times' coverage of conservatives to be dripping with condescension, even on the verge of dehumanization. And I think that is wrong. I also think the New York Times, however, has done a lot of good journalism in the Trump era, covering a president who was extraordinary. All presidents lie, but Trump lied every day. I mean, Trump would hold up this blue water bottle and say it's a red water bottle. How do you cover that? Do you say the president today said that the water bottle was red and then the Democrats said the water was blue? Or do you say he lied? And how do you say that without being endlessly hyperventilating and undermining trust? I also think the New York Times does cover things that its audience doesn't necessarily want them to cover. During the Black Lives Matter protests, for example, the New York Times did a whole series on looting and small businesses that were being looted and burned, and really did give voice to that narrative that was, inconvenient for certain folks who were more aggressive in terms of Black Lives Matter. The last thing I want to say about free and fair elections is I think the media actually protects free and fair elections rather than undermines them. If you look at authoritarian regimes where leaders will try to steal the election, they're often able to do that because the state can control the media. And I think one of the reasons why Trump was not successful in trying to, as I believe, steal the election was because of the media. You had the media out there reporting on what was happening. Of course, there was disagreement, but you had a media that was covering voter suppression. And even when it comes to voter fraud, which I think allegations of widespread voter fraud are false, there are specific instances of voter fraud. How do we know about them? The media. And so I think we need to continue to support the flowering of the media across ideological lines so that we can continue to cover things and to fight back against the bias that I do agree certainly exists on both the left and the right. And the last thing I want to do is echo what Monica said, which is that our media is a reflection of us. And I think sometimes we let ourselves off the hook. It's easy to go out there and find media that you disagree with. At first, it's a little bit scary. It makes you a little bit angry, but it ultimately makes you smarter. It makes you compassionate. And if your goal is to persuade other people, it actually makes you a more effective advocate. And so I would encourage people, even those who have a partisan agenda, to actually expose, not contaminate themselves to additional media, because it will actually empower them to persuade people who might be open to what they have to say, rather than just treating them as an irredeemable alien who can only be dominated and defeated. And that's the battle that we have in our media. And that's the battle that Braver Angels is waging every day on the Braver Angels podcast and elsewhere.
All right, very good, excellent. So questions for the speaker. We will start with David Kaufman. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. It seems to me that we have a hyper competition with the media, and if it bleeds, it leads. Who gets the story first? But what I'm concerned about is, what do you think it would take for the speaker to resolve these differences between the liberal and the conservative groups? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's a great one. I think, again, it starts with exposure. I think it starts with exactly what we're doing now. And can you imagine if we could have a debate with high-profile media figures on the left and the right? Can you imagine if Madam Chair was chairing a debate between Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow? I mean, wouldn't that be something to see? I think part of it is that people are afraid. They stay in their own rings. They're afraid of being seen as fraternizing with the enemy, and they're only playing to an audience of people that already agree with them. And while, you know, a cheap dopamine hit of retweeting something that criticizes the other side is always going to be easy, there's a deeper reward that comes from challenging oneself and broadening one's own perspective. And again, broadening one's own perspective is actually how you can be a more effective advocate.
All right, very good. Further questions, we will go to Marley Silverman, excuse me.
Madam Chair, could you please ask of the speaker, how does he view the difference between a journalist and a pundit?
It's a very good question, and oftentimes it's hard to tell the difference. And I think there's a new generation of journalists that see themselves as advocate journalists, and they believe that quote unquote moral clarity is just as important as objectivity. And I think you have to recognize that when you can, because a lot of times people will be entertainers or advocates masquerading as journalists. And so I think, again, it really takes personal responsibility for people to become more literate. And I think one thing we can do is start teaching news literacy in schools, in high schools, in colleges, teaching young people how to separate fact from fiction, how to recognize bias so that they can become more informed consumers of media and call people out when it's clear they're pushing a partisan agenda.
All right, and for a final question, we'll go to Thomas Brandt. Mr. Brandt, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, thank you. In chat, I asked if the previous speaker made the assertion that there are more left-leaning media silos than right-leaning. So my question is, if most media is for-profit, wouldn't that mean that there's more demand, for-profit demand for left-leaning media, if that premise is true?
All right.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And again, I think while legacy mainstream outlets like the New York Times, I think definitely lean liberal, I think there's a pretty flourishing brand of conservative and heterodox media out there. And the great part about it is most of it's free. You go on YouTube and you can listen to deeply reported podcasts. You can listen to deeply thoughtful commentary. and you can create your own. So again, I sometimes almost feel like people's heads are stuck in the sand, right? Like the media is out there, we can find it. The media is more democratic than it ever has been in some ways. And so instead of just shaking your head, your fist that the media seems too left or right, go out there, experience new media, and think for yourself.
All righty. With that, the speakers thanked. Jazz hands for Mr. O'Connor. Excellent. All right. So the floor is now open to, as in that is the end of our planned little run show. And so I would now like to invite speeches in the affirmative. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have one. And I think we will go with Gail Craig.
I really just wanted to ask a question of everyone present, both affirmative and negative. And that is my thinking. The media has moved, particularly cable media has moved to such filling hours with just what's referred to as talking heads, and it's all opinion. It's all these, quote, experts' opinions on what's going to happen and the dire thing that these others are going to do to us. And it's also so incredibly depressing that I have intentionally moved away from all of those kinds of shows, all of them, which before the election, I was like watching it nonstop and listening to podcasts. And now I direct my listening and watching to people, and I think there's a lot of them, and this is my point. I think it's encouraging that there are a lot of people who are journalists who are trying to come across with not their opinion, but here's the facts, and you make your decision about what you feel. And one of the things, not to do advertising, but it is a email newsletter I get every day from a journalist, and it's named Tangle. And he gives you facts about any issue that's high in the news at that point. He gives you direct quotes of what the left is saying about it. He gives you direct quotes of what the right is saying about it. And I'm not gonna lie, he gives you his take on it. But it's very difficult to see what his thing is because he listens to both sides. And my point being that the positive thing about what's going on at ground news is another one of them that tells you this is what's going on between the right and the left, and these are the facts. So I have hope for that kind of journalism. And my hope is that people will continue to support these, quote, upstarts that are not big cable news entities that are locked in to what their finances will let them do. So that was just a statement I wanted to make. It doesn't really say I actually believe that without the media, there would be no democracy. So I guess I'm affirmative if you want me to change, but I am unhappy with the direction it's going.
All right, very good. Well done. Thank you so much. And yeah, speeches are welcome. Like I said, in the affirmative or the I'm not sure or the negative, we want it all. So also just a quick interesting note before we go to questions, Tangle, the service you mentioned, we actually did an America's Public Forum interview of him on Tuesday, and the video of that will go up tomorrow. So it's a small world, and we're trying to keep on top of this. So questions for the speaker. We're going to start with Jose Urena. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My thing is, I don't know, I'm confused because I don't have cable. I haven't had cable like in the last 10 years. I really don't read newspapers. Do we really need the media as is constructed? I mean, if I want to know what the CDC said, I go to the CDC website. If I know what a president says, I go to YouTube and watch the video. So isn't that the reporters are trying to do something that is part of the past that we no longer need, and therefore we are all confused? Because if you're going to write about what the president says, just give me the link to the video. I just go to it, watch it, and make up my mind if he's lying or not lying. And if I want news from the CDC, I just go to the CDC website. Like, I unplug from news media. I think I'm better for it. So I'm trying to say why is the need of journalism? And I'm challenging you guys, being a little sarcastic, but to be truthful, it's like I'm reading more opinion than news. So I don't need nobody's opinion. I have my own, and then I can just go to the source. So why the reporters, why are they relevant still?
Great. All right, Ms. Craig, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think reporters are doing the work that I'm too lazy to do, right? For instance, they're doing the deep search. I can't go to every website. I'm even retired and I don't have the time to go to every single website where there's a news story, right? And then make my decision about whether it's this or that. So I agree with Jose that is a really good way to get information, but reporters are doing the work, the good ones are doing the work on the facts that we need to have to make good decisions, is my theory. I can't imagine living without them.
All right, further questions? Gary Johnson, I saw your hand up. It may have gone down. Still have a question? Go ahead and unmute. All right, I just hit a button asking you to unmute.
Hi, it's actually, thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question. I just had a short statement that I'd like to make.
You can make it into a question if you want to, or you can give a speech. Either of those. How about you consider giving a speech? How's that sound?
Okay, we can call it a speech.
Well, excellent. So that'd be great. And I'll call on you when we call for speeches. Whips, please reach
Okay.
out to this fella.
Thank you.
Excellent. So let's go to Natalie Neal. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
This is Natalie Neal. This is my first time host speaker.
Woo!
You please ask. That's something I'd like to say. Often, whether talking about politics or COVID or whatever, I say I watch and read both sides of the news, and more often than not, people are just silent and they can't have a conversation. So I'm meeting a lot of people that aren't reading both sides of the news. That's very disconcerting. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little about what I believe to be the epidemic of narcissism in the world right now. And maybe some people are dramatic and use the media for a stage, but I do not believe that.
All right. Ms. Craig, what are your thoughts?
Madam Chair, can you just clarify the question for me?
Sure. Ms. Neal, would you like to offer a rephrase?
Let's see. It's not, let's see, the question would be, I often, when I tell people that I watch both sides of the news, they aren't interested in listening about the fact that I do watch both sides of the news.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
So yeah, the question then is the problem that we have biased media, or is it that people aren't even interested in the news that the other side is sharing? Is that right?
I guess I think that, and you know, I don't know I'm exactly prepared for this, but the things that I read and I hear that are both sides, I try to share with people I know and who are willing to discuss that and willing to listen to it. So some are not interested, and I have some really extreme friends. I'm going to say particularly on the left. So, but I have broadened my mind, and I'm trying to do that with the people I know. I just share what I read and hear.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Extra round of jazz hands for our first timers. Woo. All right, very good. So I'm now looking for a speech in the negative. And Mr. Gary Johnson, if you want to make your remarks now and they're in the negative, you are invited up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in opposition to the resolution. I don't believe the media undermines free speech or fair elections. It does influence them, though. There are two things that most media outlets have. One is an editorial staff with an agenda, and two is an accounting staff that keeps reminding the editorial staff that they need to make more money.
Right.
And the best way to make money is to sell more product. And the one thing that sells most, not only in this country, but the world over, is something we call emotion. So if you can engender emotion, you will sell more product. I think Ms. Guzman implied that when she spoke of fear. And emotion comes from a number of things: discord, controversy, sex, violence, a number of things. But to sell the product, to make more profit, you need to engender emotion. Now, both sides of the political spectrum, or all sides, I should say, do that. And they engender that emotion with a bent towards their political view. But that in itself, in my view, does not undermine free elections, but it does influence them. And even if media did not exist, there would be operatives out there doing that exact same thing, influencing the election process. Therefore, I oppose the resolution.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Jazz hands, absolutely. Are there questions for the speaker? I see Marina. Marina, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you. My question slash comment was about the previous.
Got to be a question. Oh, it's about the previous speaker. Okay, yes, you can ask it now to this speaker if you want to.
No, previous comments.
Okay, that actually, so the way that our style of debate works is you can only ask questions to the speaker. Well, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that.
And okay, so I'll try to rephrase it for this speaker.
Thank you. Perfect.
Where do you draw the line?
Where does he draw the line? Mm-hmm.
Where do you draw the line between influencing the election and, excuse my language, fucking them up?
All right, let's be a little careful, but yes, we all understand what you mean. Go ahead.
Well, excellent question. I think you would go past the line of just influencing when you just blatantly put out false truths, and also incentivize folks to embrace those false truths. That, in my view, would be going across the line.
Good.
Can I have a follow-up to that?
No, but I might call on you again. And it was a very good question. It was actually the question that was in my mind too. So I'm glad you're here and raising your hand. For our next question, we'll go to Ron Staniszewski. Might not be pronouncing that right. Go ahead.
That's close enough.
Okay.
Listen, Gary, I appreciate what you said. and
So
I
you've got to
understand
ask your question to me.
Well, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I apologize.
You appreciate what the speaker said. Yeah.
That's fine. The question is basically that Mr. Johnson's experiences are not mine, so he's going to have a different view, and I respect that. The problem is, I think in this country that we expect everyone to agree with our views, and the media just reflects that out to the rest of the world.
And so your question is?
So my question is, what does Mr. Johnson believe that the media's responsibility is to reflect the views of everybody without saying that my views are wrong or your views are wrong, just giving the views of different people? Say, hey, Mr. Johnson went through these experiences, Ron Staniszewski went through these experiences. So what is the media's responsibility to give the information to the people without editorializing every comment?
Okay, I certainly admit and understand it's hard to make it interesting and therefore sellable, just spewing dry facts. But I think it's the media's responsibility to gather facts and format it in such a way that the truth is put out there in a way that is digestible by the average person in the electorate. That's the media's responsibility, in my view. It's not responsible for skewing or for making certain things happen, but for informing folks. And you do that by gathering facts, putting it together, and making it digestible by the average electorate.
All right. And for a final question, Marina, I'll give you that follow-up. Go ahead and ask your question to me.
So the question is, the follow-up is, if I believe that media is only spreading lies and nothing else, there is no truth whatsoever. And I can give you example after example, starting with, there is no American media, for example, that has ever shown the demonstrations against the COVID certificates in Germany or France. And I haven't looked at every media, but I talk about it with so many people that watch so many different media that somebody would have thrown it in my face saying, but you haven't seen this. Then how is it any different between what my original question is, influencing election, and them up? Since you told me to be
and messing them up, yes.
Oh,
okay, so
good one. Thank you.
You're good. So I'm going to state this, and you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly. Given that there are major things that we experience that the media don't report, is that a form of influencing, or is that still in the realm of just is that a form of basically media misconduct, undermining, or is it just influencing? Is that right?
It's a very gentle way of putting it. If
I left out the profanity. I'm sorry. Yes.
No. I wasn't talking about the profanity. If I completely agree with Gail that it's impossible to know everything without somebody mentioning it at some point. And I will also agree with, I forgot his name, the gentleman who said that the best way is to go to the original source. But you only have one life, and a day, unfortunately, only has 24 hours. And media only spreading lies and nothing else. And in a case,
I'm going to ask you to come to your question. Mm-hmm.
In examples that I gave, it's a lies by omission. Like, nobody in America knows that there are huge demonstrations in both Germany and France.
Okay.
Great. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. No, you're good. So what about lies of omission? What about all that the media omits? Yeah, Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
So unfortunately, there are not terabytes, exabytes and petabytes of data, of information that occur on a daily basis globally. And since we're talking about as far as the media is concerned, a market-driven entity, I think the best response would be for we consumers to show that in our consumer behavior. If a particular outlet is not giving you enough of the international searches situation, don't buy their stuff. And I think that would be where I would like to see us start in this country.
All right. And with that, Mr. Johnson is thanked. Jazz hands for Mr. Johnson. Excellent. All righty. So I'm now looking for speeches in the affirmative, and I'm also going to shorten speeches to 3 minutes because we have several people who want to speak, and I'd like to try to get through as many as possible. So let's go to Matthew Hausman. Let's go ahead and unmute, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it right, Madam Chair?
Yep.
So I'm speaking in the affirmative that media is undermining free speech and fair elections. But I think it's important to define media, I think, differently than others have. Because I think I'm talking about media in the general landscape of getting information out. I think a lot of people have been talking about journalism, and I'm talking about media itself. And some people have mentioned how disruptive media might be a key to helping it. And I think we need a little bit of a history lesson in that disruptive media is actually how we got here. If we look back at the 1980s, after the Fairness Doctrine was repealed, then you had talk radio rise up, and they were basically saying, we're the real news. You can't trust the mainstream media. And then that turned into cable news. And then now that's come into the current social media podcasts and everything. And then they started to peel away listeners and then viewers. And then you had the legacy media start to respond. And so it's weird. I kind of find myself in this weird situation where I'm in the affirmative, but a lot of my arguments are the same as the people who have been speaking in the negative. That it is the consumers have been going with this media that they like and that kind of reflects their echo chamber. And therefore journalists have been getting ignored. So actual journalism has been getting ignored by the disruptive media, the ones that just want to get eyeballs and clicks. And so one of the first speakers mentioned Watergate. And we got to realize that Nixon's main way of addressing that was to attack the media and talk about how the media was out to get him. And we're seeing this continue to grow over the past 50 years from that aspect. And so my affirmative about when I say the media is undermining free speech and fair elections, that is the media. It is this disruptive media, this democratization, I think, has actually been kind of a negative in that people are only searching for that media that reinforces what they already believe, rather than the old, it's a little bit elitist, but the gatekeeper model where people who were trying to have journalistic standards, putting that out there. Those are the ones that people still try to do that, but we don't listen to that. Instead, the media now is, as people have mentioned many times, it's all about eyeballs and clicks and profits. Somebody mentioned the Atlantic article, and because I had read that and I was thinking of that too, the German model that came in, public media in Germany that kind of helped to depolarize the society there. And so I think that is a model. In that article, they mentioned that the only American media that is not disliked by both sides is PBS. I think also the Wall Street Journal, actually. So, but I think that is the mediascape that I think is undermining free speech and fair elections.
All right, very good. A new angle, yes. Are there questions for the speaker? I see we're going to start with Mr. O'Connor. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Thank you. How would the speaker respond to the argument that the gatekeeper model was basically reliant on homogeneity and sort of keeping certain voices out of the room. I mean, most of the editors and such, you know, all were white men, you know, from the same zip codes. And how could we ever go back to that model when the table is a lot more full?
Right.
So my response would be that, yes, that is an argument against the gatekeeper and elite model, again, the elitist aspect. And I think that also means there's a difference with when I say disruptive. So there's disruptive media when you have the journalists of color that are making, talking about stories that are happening in third world countries that are ignored by American media. You do need that type of disruptive media that still, disruptive media that tries to break down that aspect of the gatekeepers, but are still upholding journalistic standards, but not the disruptive media that is just trying to disrupt those journalistic standards. So I think that's the issue. The gatekeepers between what voices are heard versus the disruption of journalistic standards, I think is the difference.
Got it. Yeah, so for the question, we'll go to Irina.
Softball questions allowed, just to help the.
They are.
Please.
Okay, so looking at the data, only 25 million Americans read the newspaper weekly, and the highest viewership of cable news, which is around 2.5 million, which Fox has. Even if you put those two numbers together, that's 30 million people out of 300 million people country. Can we really put the blame on the media when we are really not using the mainstream media?
All right.
My response is yes, because even though people aren't reading or watching, they get the little snippets. What you see in the peripheral and what you just see in a headline and what you see somebody share a post on social media, it still sticks in your head. Even if you're not reading, if you're not watching the story, if you're not reading the article, if you just see something small. And so when people don't care about journalistic ethics and they share BS, that BS still sticks, even if at some level, you know, that's why the famous Goebbels quote about repeat the lie over and over and over again. That's kind of what happens. So even though it is a small portion that are actually watching and reading, if it's still out there, if it's still in the ether, it's influencing.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands. Yes. Very good. Interesting new angles and distinctions. So I'm now looking for a speech in the negative. And we will go with Mr. Lumsdaine. Go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to talk about a little bit of a different topic, but it's something I'm passionate about. So I would say that American freedom is not a threat to free speech and free elections, but that American money is instead. In the political and social spectrum, I would say that attention is money. And I think the Republican primary of 2016 is a great example of this. There were 17 candidates in this primary, a lot of them major voices in the Republican Party. And I know, at least when Trump announced that he was running, I didn't know very many conservatives who would have picked him as their first choice. However, out of all of those 17 candidates, Trump received 50+% of press focus. And this was the case because he was confrontational and he was loud. Sometimes he was maddening. Sometimes he was disagreeable. A quote that's pretty famous from the CEO of CBS at the time was, "It may not be good for America, but it's darn good for CBS." Another similar quote in the same vein, "There's no such thing as bad publicity." Today, I think the most outspoken, often most popular members of different parties are not necessarily those who are building bridges and solving problems, but those who are yelling the loudest. They don't offer solutions usually, but they point out problems really well. And they yell really loud to raise funding so that they can continue to yell loud. To me, it seems like extremism drives elections, even within parties, as people compete to see who can be the most Trumpist or the most socialist. And those extremes are the ones that the news often carries, because news knows what will be popular and that people will watch it because they either really love it or they really hate it. I would say the fault is not with the media outlets mostly for carrying what the people want to hear, but the fault of the people for asking for the extreme, and the fault of those in power for giving us that extreme. Major reason for this, I would say, is because election funding is driven in two ways, really, by companies like the oil industry and the solar industry, for instance, who have a vested interest in policies of our nation. They give money to whoever speaks the loudest for the policies that they want, for what will make them money. The second is the people. When searching for funding, however, those in power don't speak to everyone, but just those who might give them money. The goal is not to speak the truth, but to speak whatever those who might give them money will want to hear. Then this message is carried by the media because it's popular, because it's what people want to hear, whether, again, they love it or they hate it. This is a vicious cycle, I think. Politicians asking for funding, being carried by the news, perpetuating extreme views on the other side, that the other side then will prey on, so that they can get funding, so on and so forth. It goes back and forth. I would say if funding is limited, both from companies and the public, the goal would not necessarily be to reach a small population as loudly as possible, but instead to speak what will reach a wide audience. I would close real quick with saying we often blame the media and not those the media discusses, quotes, and often represents. Ensuring that extremists are not who receive the most money and popularity, I think would offer incentives to politicians and the media to focus more on truth and less on popularity.
All right, very good. Questions for the gentleman? Yes, jazz hands. Let's start with Joe Glazer. You are still muted, Mr. Glazer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would ask you to address the speaker. This is a broader question, but it encompasses part of what has been said. An uncontrolled media environment, i.e. like a free market capitalism as applied to media, has contributed tremendously to the large number of outlets and the varied biases that they may present. This caters to one aspect of human nature that is universal, and that is that it is a lot easier to view things in black and white terms than on a continuous spectrum, a more colorful, more interpreted manner.
I'm going to ask you to come to your question.
I need to just finish this point, and I will get there. This is human nature, and unbridled capitalism provides the juice to permit it to be explored and exploited, because the motivation of the media, unbridled, is indeed to make money, that there is no other potential motive for it to be that unbridled, and they will converge on those techniques that help them make the most money, catering to this
your question is
aspect of human nature. The contradiction.
The question.
Yes. Why could we not do the gatekeeper model with the standards that are implicit to it and address the issue of unrepresented voices by channeling them towards the gatekeeping rules and the content of the custodial philosopher kings, if you will, if you want to get Greek about it, and through that mechanism maintain journalistic standards without having to give in to the unbridled and biased free capital, free market approach and still seek to get everyone fairly represented.
Got it. I will just remind folks that questions can be speeches. That sounded pretty substantive to me. So, all right, go ahead. You may answer.
From what I understood there, I would say pretty much that I don't think a lot of the issue is with the media and whether it's capitalist or whether you set up some gatekeeping system. I would say that I think a lot of the issue is with those that the media is parroting, those in positions of power, those in positions of power are the ones trying to earn money, and they earn money by being loud and being aggressive and being extreme. And I think that we need to shut off the flow of money to extremism rather necessarily than change the way the media itself works. I'm sorry if that didn't really address your question well.
It's all good. So with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands, very good. Okay. So I'm now looking for a speech in the affirmative, and I'd like to call on Rita Chisholm. Ms. Chisholm, go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes. After this, we'll switch to 2-minute speeches. Go ahead, Ms. Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will ask for everyone's indulgence, as I did not intend to do this, but I have had something in my heart and mind for quite some time that I hope I can present it in such a way that it might, bring up some conversation. Something that as a child, I'm 63 years of age now, and I recall as a younger person, watching the news with my family, the evening news, and there was always this sense of respect that I had for the anchors, the ones that were reporting the news. And something that at my age that I have come to be disappointed in, and I really do understand that the economic model, these are the anchors, the reporters are working for a corporation to which they have to, they have certain roles and they have certain guidelines that they have to stick within. Something that's been bothering me, and it may be naive on my part, and I'm really interested in hearing others' opinions. I often, if I watch, I don't watch often, but if I do watch the news, I'm often taken aback by what I consider to be intellectual dishonesty. They're reporting things that it's almost as if we're too ignorant to understand that some of what they're reporting it does make no sense, no logical sense in ways. It's almost to me as if they think that their comments or whatever, that I will take everything hook, line, and sinker, so to speak. Does anyone else feel that? Or is that just something that for myself, I think I'm smarter than I really am, but it bothers me that I feel like there's a certain, and I don't think it comes from the anchors personally, but it's an overall attitude of, well, this is what we're going to report, and we don't care what we understand there may be those in the audience that are intelligent enough to know this isn't the whole story, but this is what we're going to report. Is there no pride in their role, in the public role? And so I'm just curious if I'm the only one that has felt that, or do other people sense that also? And I'm talking about on both sides, because I've seen it from both sides.
All right. It's a good question. You got some jazz hands for everyone from people who I think feel similarly. And I really appreciate the personal perspective. I'd like to invite questions for Ms. Chisholm. I see Larry Howe. Mr. Howe, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I also feel like that, it used to be there was an hour or two's worth of news, and now everything else is a bunch of commentary. But there's been a recent book out called The Death of Expertise that actually touches on some of the information with regard to who we look at for news and who we look at for commentary. So I was wondering if the speaker had heard of that book or has any thoughts on that.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate this, and I am very quick to say that I'm a fairly new Braver Angels member, and honestly was never very political in the past. And I just felt really drawn into. My thing was what I was feeling was I was feeling very sad about the division I was seeing. I just don't understand that personally. So for me, it was like, how can we be divided? We're people and we all have the right to our personal understanding and personal opinions, and to beat one another up over that just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm learning so much, Larry. So I appreciate what you're saying. And I really do believe, I'm sorry.
You're good. You're good.
I appreciate what he's saying. And no, I had not heard of that, but that is something that I would be very interested in reading to gain more knowledge, to really learn more about this. So thank you.
All righty. And we'll do one more quick question. Nancy Martin, you've been patient. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I do have a question for, I believe it was Stephen, who was
actually, unfortunately, you can only ask questions right now to Rita. You can ask your question to her or whichever you prefer.
You broke up when you said that, so.
Sorry, what I said is, in our format, you can only ask questions to the person who just spoke. So you can either ask your question to Rita or you can hold on to it, either way.
Well, I think this is maybe a little bit different topic, so I'll just hold
on. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So with that, the speaker is thanked, and jazz hands for Ms. Chisholm.
Thank you.
Well done, well done. I think there are a lot of folks with us actually who started off not that political. All right, I'm now looking for a speaker for a speech in the negative, and unfortunately we're going to have to, this always happens. We have a lot of folks who want to speak and we're running out of time. So we're going to do 2-minute speeches, and we're going to go with Ethan Abelman. 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, you can hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll try and speed through my random assortment of thoughts. And I'd sort of like to build on a couple of the previous speakers discussing the state of particularly the legacy news media today. And I don't include cable news in that, they've always been partisan. But anyway, regarding the resolution, I'm not sure I necessarily agree or disagree, it's kind of phrased weirdly. Just briefly, I worked actually at NPR briefly in their audience insights division, and I do need to issue a quick correction that despite its name, it's a private nonprofit. It gets its revenue from local station fees and corporate sponsorships, not the federal government. You need to slip that in there. And I cannot emphasize enough how much modern content is driven by clicks, but I think we all know that. What I really want to say is that at the same time, there's some really, really great stuff that legacy media does that sort of upstart media doesn't. They have ethical standards. They grapple with all these sort of complicated issues about journalism. We talk about reporting the facts. It's not that simple. It's not very, like, being objective in journalism isn't really a thing. No matter how you present something, there's going to be some sort of spin, and you need to navigate that carefully. And that's something that every reputable news outlet, legacy media news outlet, whether it's NPR, New York Times, Walter Cronkite, they all struggle with this, whether we see it or not. There's a great, NPR has a great newsletter actually from their public editor that is sort of, they dive into issues and comments they get about their coverage each week, and it's really great to get some perspective into that. So I recommend that.
You have 30 seconds. Just want to remind you, this is a short speech. Make sure you, go for it.
Yes, 30 seconds. So yeah, so I have a lot of concerns about the direction media is heading in terms of the partisanship and the emotion, and especially how social media algorithms amplify certain things, which actually matter a lot for media advertisers. But I really think we need legacy news media. I need them to provide context. I don't trust myself to go and search YouTube and see whatever the facts are without understanding the complete context. And I want them to go and call the sources, verify the facts, someone with journalistic standards, helping me understand the world, to understand what's important and why. And they often suck at that, but we can't, it's imperfect, but I feel like we need it. And so I'll take that over sort of a random person on a podcast or cable news talking head, shouting any day. And I'd prefer to focus on reforming that and trying to make that better.
All right. Jazz hands, solution oriented. I love it. We'll do one quick question if anyone has one. Actually, okay. Tab, Mr. Berg, go ahead, unmute and ask your question to me.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would like to know if the speaker believes that the competition from the shouting YouTubers for advertising is helping to draw the legacy media back to their original mission.
I thank the speaker for their question. I actually think it's quite the opposite. And that the shouting is sort of what I've called the shouting, upstart media tends to be more extreme. It tends to be more, it tends to be based less on in-depth reporting and on calling sources and things like that, and more on opinion. And as that type of media gains prominence, I think it forces, again, talking about the economics of it, it forces legacy media to feel like they have to be more incendiary and to write clickbait headlines and all of those things. So actually, I think it's quite the opposite. And I don't think that means that there isn't a role for that type of media. I think that it's always great for legacy media to be challenged in terms of how it covers things. And as I said, it's far from perfect. There's a lot of stuff that they get wrong, but it concerns me that people feel like they can't trust the journalistic process that these organizations use, and that they feel like they need to turn to these other sources.
All right, very good. With that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands, yes. Okay, we're gonna do two more speeches, one F, one neg, and we're not gonna do questions because we're just squeezing them in here. So our final affirmative speech will be Sean Gersman, if you still have your speech.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
You have 2 minutes.
Yes, I'll make this very short. This is basically a lamentation, and unlike the previous speaker, it's not solution focused. It's just complaining. But basically, I grew up in the 70s and early 80s, and I always loved that we had a free press here, and you could really watch the news, and you could depend that what you were watching were the facts. And we would look at other countries like the Soviet Union that had Pravda, and we knew they knew that they weren't getting the right news. It was slanted. We looked at Chairman Mao in China, and we knew that they weren't getting accurate news because they were reading the Little Red Book. But now I feel like in this country, we have multiple Pravdas and multiple Little Red Books that are going around, and we've lost the Walter Cronkite's, we've lost the objective sources of fact, and now we're just simply, in a fractured setting where we have to read, like I said, these multiple distorted sources, almost like they did in the authoritarian regimes. And I just think it's very sad. I'll leave it at that.
All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. Yes, jazz hands, absolutely. It's an interesting perspective. And for our final speech of the evening, 2 minutes, Esther Cash, negative. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, a couple people tonight have made points about how we are the media, and I feel like we've been overlooking the place where that statement is the most true, which is social media and online media. And as probably the youngest person on this Zoom call, I feel that it is my responsibility to talk about the digital world and the way that our media format and media consumption have evolved, especially because the resolution is looking at freedom of speech and fair elections. I don't think our media has ever promoted free speech the way that it does now. You can comment on any person's article, on any person's video, by any organization, big or small, news-oriented or things like that. It's very easy for someone who disagrees with a liberal media outlet to comment on their outlet that I disagree exactly with what you are saying. And I also think that some previous speakers made points about podcasts and creating your own media. Again, we have lots of platforms that allow people to make their own posts and also share their own posts. We're talking about free elections in media. Social media is probably one of the reasons that the 2020 election broke records in terms of voter turnout. We had lots of young people voting, and it's because mail-in voting, all of that information was spread on social media. I saw so many posts of people saying, or with comments of people saying, I didn't even know mail-in voting was a thing until right now. I saw lots of Instagram stories that promoted things to do on how to register to vote. All of that information got promoted online in social media forums and in the comment section of media stories that were posted about the election, and people seeing that the media was posting something about an election, deciding that they either agree with what it was saying or disagreed, and then commenting about it, and then finding resources on how to do things, voting and real stuff. So I think that social media has a lot of flaws, but I think that it is a key factor in American media and in American free speech. And I think that it was a result of, or it resulted in one of the most free and fair elections in our nation's history. So, thank you.
All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands. I happen to know that this is Esther's first speech, and so giving her an extra round of jazz hands. Woohoo! Yeah. All righty. So we are now going to technically adjourn and then have a quick conversation about how we think this went and what people liked and learned from and all that. So just because I'm a stickler on parliamentary procedure, I'd like somebody to raise a motion to adjourn. Just raise your hand and say, I move we adjourn. Got to say it though. You have to unmute yourself.
We adjourn.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. With that, we are adjourned. But don't go anywhere, because some of the most interesting part of the night is what is going to happen right now. And that is two things. First, we're going to open the chat, and we'd like you to put in the chat for everybody the answers to these questions. What did you learn tonight, and what did you enjoy? And I'd also love to invite some folks to tell us their answers out loud. So if you have a thought on that, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand, and you are also invited to put your answers in the chat. Marina, we'll start with you. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
So I learned how naive people are. And I understand that they only know what they know, and because from what they've seen. But it amazed me that majority does not recognize that, especially as a youth, but youth as an experience, that
I'm just gonna. So I hear you, and I'm just gonna ask that we remember that this is we're trying to avoid ad hominems and sort of characterizations here. So you learned that people were more naive than you expected. Is that fair?
Naive to the extreme.
Okay. Thank you. Other folks, what did you learn and what did you enjoy? Mr. Iwinski.
Well, I really learned that there are so many subtle interpretations of this point. I was fascinated by how many different ways people came at this issue on both sides of it. And I really appreciate the depth of thinking. And as always in a Braver Angels event, the professionalism and courtesy of everybody on what can be a very heated issue is the core of what makes this a unique place to speak. And so thanks to everybody for that.
Absolutely.
That one will only have to thank you to April.
Sorry. I have to mute you because that was out of turn, but I appreciate it. Nancy Martin, go ahead. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
Well, I learned about the Tangle, which I will check out and take a look at. And I really enjoyed hearing the different perspectives, and very much enjoyed the clarity that the speakers spoke with, and your demeanor as the Madam Chair. So appreciate it.
All right, great. Yeah, Karen Fink, what did you learn? What did you enjoy? Either or both?
Well, I think one thing I really learned was just to have a little more appreciation for citizens' role in pushing media towards these extreme positions. I mean, I have thought about that before, but it wasn't until I heard everybody really talking about it that I kind of gave that a little more credence and felt like we do maybe have more power than I was thinking we had before. So that was something I learned. And then what I really liked going back to this debate format where all of the people on the call can ask questions and potentially make a speech. It seems like there's been a mix of formats where we go to panels, which are also really interesting. And I hadn't seen the debate format as much. So I hope that we continue to have some of these debates because I think they're great for all of us. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Karen, you are going to get your wish. We will definitely be doing more of these. Monica.
Yeah, I mean, being in journalism means that, man, I hear a lot of opinions about the media and everyone's thinking about it. And I've gone through my cynical phases and my grossly optimistic phases and all of that. But what I really appreciate about tonight is being reminded that the media means absolutely nothing without public participation and public input. And I've kind of devoted, my professional career to that philosophy, that it all has to take its cues from the American people, and journalists can never be done with learning how to do what they do. And we all have to be a part of that process for it to work for us. So thanks to everyone who made those connections and just showed up with so much at stake. And I really enjoyed just once again being reminded of the passion that exists across the country and across perspectives for making sure that we get our stories right.
Wonderful. Mr. Hendricks, unfortunately we aren't, this happens too. We have more people who want to say these things than we have time for, but Mr. Hendricks, and then I'll try to get through a couple more. Go ahead.
Okay, so I learned that there are some quite nuanced arguments on the against side, on the basically defending journalism side, but no one was really defending journalism. It was about, it's not really the mainstream media, it's social media, and it was about, it's market forces, not political bias. So I thought that was refreshing to see some nuance on the side of the argument opposite to mine. I also learned from that, so I'm very much on the for side. I think journalism is very much in a downward spiral. I learned I should focus on journalistic integrity. It was mentioned once briefly. I think that should be the focus of the discussion. So are the things we are being presented with accurate? Are we checking our sources and verifying them? And what kind of rhetoric do we use when we talk about the issues? Do we hype up emotions or do we use neutral language? But mostly about, do we get things right or not?
All right, very good. Thomas Brandt, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just summarize what I just put in chat. I was going to give an overview of the last 50 years of journalism evolution in the US, but the fairness doctrine only applied to broadcasters, TV and broadcast TV and radio. That did not cover cable.
Is this is what you learned or what you enjoyed?
Yeah, I'm learning that people didn't know this, I guess you would say.
Oh, okay.
That the fairness
Sure.
doctrine doesn't apply to all media, only applies to broadcasters, not cable TV, not print media, not social media. In the case of social media, the focus of reform and regulation is now on Section 230 of what's known as the 1996 Communications Decency Act. That's where they're debating.
This is sounding a little like a speech, but I appreciate your enthusiasm, and it's good information. So we're going to go for two more, Stephen and then Silas. Stephen, go ahead. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
One thing I learned was that for the media issue, however you want to look at it, there are a wide variety of potential solutions that I hadn't really thought about and that give me a little bit of hope. And what I enjoyed was a discussion format and setting where it felt like we were all working together to try and solve a problem rather than trying to force our own opinions. It felt like we were working together, which is really good.
Absolutely. And Silas Kulkarni, you get the last word on this piece. What did you learn, or what did you enjoy?
Pressure. That's big pressure. Am I cutting out? Oh.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, so well, I think I saw Clay I put in the chat similarly. I just learned how much this sentiment was shared on both sides of the aisle. That regardless of what your political position, you really had many people really felt that there was a problem with the media. Then that was a big issue. And then what I enjoyed is the depth of constructive solutions that were offered by a lot of people voicing theirs, especially from the journalism community, and also some from the youth voices, especially.
Wonderful. Well, I learned a lot in this debate. I mean, I have worked in journalism, and I still learned a lot about journalism and about how we can think about it together. And I think the thing that I'll say I enjoyed was, so the Intelligence Squared debate last week was a really sophisticated, interesting take on one particular source, the New York Times. And I have loved watching the conjunction of that sort of expert debate on that particular case and this sort of very democratic, let's hear everybody's view conversation about this. I think it's been a really interesting juxtaposition and feels sort of whole to me. And so I really enjoyed that. And I just want to thank Intelligence Squared one more time. If we could give them a round of jazz hands for co-sponsoring with us. And yeah, and Clea, if you want to share anything about how we can find you guys and follow up further, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, April. You know, for me, this being my first Braver Angels debate and hearing from all of you and really woohoo, as an extension of, really kind of inspired by the Intelligence Squared debate. One of the things that stood out to me about this conversation was that we actually don't really agree on what facts are. And that there seems to be a prevailing skepticism toward we should just get the facts. That's it. We should just go to the CDC and get the facts. But the truth is, and in the pursuit of truth, which I think debate is the vehicle for exploring these two sides, the facts are on both sides. There's different facts on both sides. And what journalism does is help us reconcile those. So when you see facts come out about masks and mandates, and then there's different facts from the CDC and different health organizations, who's actually giving you the insight into understanding that and navigating also the deluge of information that comes at us now 24/7 from countless sources. So what we do at Intelligence Squared is bring these two sides together, armed with their facts, to compare and contrast them in real time, because we really want to hear those experts back up their give us the evidence, back up their statements, and defend that point of view in a way that's persuasive and teaches us something new. So I invite all of you to sign up for our newsletter. That's where we announce all of our upcoming debates. We've launched a whole bunch of virtual debates, as you saw last week. And one thing I really appreciated about this too is there's actually quite a spectrum of opinion here. And we have a couple debate formats that we're experimenting with to try and explore that, where it's less about the left and the right, and also the nuance and the gradient of ideas that exist between the binary. And we invite you to come explore that with us, support our work. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization too. And I think similar to Braver Angels, working at the intersection of nonprofit, philanthropy and media is a tough place to be, but it enables us to produce really high quality content that isn't beholden to advertisers and clickbait. And so, your support's really meaningful, and we're really grateful to be involved.
All right. Thanks to our partner once again. And yes, there will be a link to Intelligence Squared in the chat. And I assume it'll show up in just a minute. There it is. Great. So couple other just sort of final notes, and then we will wrap up for the evening. The first is I want to just invite, we always talk a little bit about like, why do we do this work? And so tonight I'd like to ask Monica, if you're new here, why should you join? Why should you be part of this?
Hey everyone. So yes, I hope that for those of you who have not attended a Braver Angels debate, you've gotten a bit of a flavor for how thoughtful we try to be about making structures and contexts and spaces where we can truly, actually hear each other so that we can truly, actually have a chance at understanding where each other is coming from. Braver Angels begins with that place that nobody is beyond understanding, that we all have something to contribute to the American story, that while there might be ideas that are more ultimately right than others and more correct than others, we're actually all figuring this out as we go. And in this extremely polarized time, we need more forces and more incentives, from the ground and your daily lives and your daily conversations all the way up to the halls of Congress that are fighting against some of the forces we talked about tonight. The fear of each other, the siloing, the sensationalism, all these things that reflect these pieces of human nature that have brought us to this very difficult moment in the American story. And so we know because we've seen it work, and we're working on it with partners like Intelligence Squared. We know that there is a better way, all the way from those daily conversations right up to influencing how our leaders do their work. And we're not giving up because we see it working and it's growing. So please do consider joining Braver Angels. We do amazing stuff. We want you to be a part of it. We've got 70 plus alliances all across the country, all across like different states with red and blue leadership. Like, we're serious, y'all. We're serious. So get in it with us, join us. We're having a lot of fun. Yeah, and we need you. Let's do it.
All right, thank you. I love it. Ethan says, even I, as a young person without savings, give some of my money to Braver Angels. Amazing. Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, well, wonderful, everyone. And speaking of those alliances, I'd like to tell you about just a couple upcoming things. So the first is you can sign up now if you want to for our next debate, which is on national service on August 19th. It'll be interesting, and we have a couple other great topics coming up as well. Critical race theory will be at the beginning of September, voting end of September. So the one you can sign up for right now is national service, and just we'll keep them coming. So go ahead and do that if you're interested. We'll put the link in the chat. And then the other step I would really recommend is if you're not already connected to your local alliance, definitely it's worth it, because these conversations are like even cooler in person. And there's something special about cross geography too, but the way we're really trying to build this is in local communities around the country. So you can see the link in the chat to how to get involved with Braver Angels locally, and highly, highly recommend. And then finally, it would actually, one more way that you can get involved, which Leslie will kill me if I don't mention this, is you can join us. You can join the debate team. I promise you it's the most fun. Yeah, I see everybody jamming. It's the most fun you will ever have volunteering. And you'll get to support these conversations, which are clearly really critical for our country. So if you're interested in that, just email Leslie, or Leslie, you can put the debate team volunteer email in the chat as well. And then finally, we have an evaluation form. We are constantly trying to make these better. And so if you would go ahead and fill that out too, that would be wonderful. We'll stick that link in the chat as well. Finally, I imagine that a lot of you saw this if you're looking at the chat, but based on the conversation, we threw in some links to, and just recommendations for that different people had mentioned for news sources that try to provide both sides in a fairly intentional way. So that is in the chat as well. And guys, we're going to end on time. This is, unusual these days because people have so much to say, but thank you all so much for being here. Thank you again to Intelligence Squared, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Can I ask a real quick question on the list
Not right now, sorry, but send an email to that. Let's see, it's debatevolunteerteam@braveangels.org, and we'll get back to you. And yes, Esther, if you would play our other song, that would be delightful. This is another one from our songwriting contest.
An idea virus is festering inside us. It spreads as it finds us, it splits and divides us. But don't worry now, I figure it out. I know where it's from, and I know without doubt. The virus resides on the other side. The side that confuses, the side that believes all they hear in their news. The virus resides on the other side, the side that's not us. They are so quick to hate, they're so quick to doubt. Yeah, so don't read any books from the other side. They are so uninformed, their ideas are deformed. Don't watch any news from the other side. It's nothing but hate, propaganda and lies. Don't make any friends from the other side. If the side that is rotten and evil inside, don't engage anyone from the other side. They won't see things your way, they can be converted. They are too late to be saved, but our side is fine. It never has sinned, it will always be fine, as it always has been. We can't let the speed divide we fall. We cannot be weak, we must ourselves a ball. An idea virus is faster inside us. It spreads as it finds us, it splits and divides us. A pandemic of thoughts will continue to spread. It will faster and rot if we don't stop it instead. So don't read any books from the other side. They are so uninformed, their ideas are deformed. Don't watch any news from the other side. It's nothing but hate, propaganda and lies. Don't make any friends from the other side. If the side that is rotten and evil inside, don't engage anyone from the other side. They won't see things your way, they can be converted. They are too late to be saved. Our side is fine, it never has sinned. An idea virus is faster inside us. It spreads as it finds us, it splits and divides us. An idea virus is faster inside us. It spreads as it finds us, it splits and divides us. An idea virus is festering inside us.
Right. Braver Angels, it's everybody. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Great job, April. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Oops.
Thanks.